So next up, I'd like to introduce, I think I have some, because I have two microphones. I got two phones, one for the, okay, never mind. Only some of y'all get that. Okay, all right, so I'd like to introduce Naheed Nenshi. Naheed is the former distinguished mayor of Calgary and was awarded the 2014 World Mayor Prize for his outstanding leadership and track record of expanding equity and opportunity for all. In addition to being the first Muslim mayor of a large North American city, Naheed is a passionate person from Calgary, an accomplished business professional and community leader, and has been a trusted advisor to corporate leaders in Calgary and the U.S. Please welcome Mayor Nenshi to the stage.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I feel really underdressed right now.
No. You know, I wear this to go jogging.
I was going to say, you didn't want to dress up for the event today?
So I just want to let you all know, after Mayor Nenshi speaks, he's going to be joined by Council Member Maria Quiñones-Sánchez and Dalila Wilson-Scott from Comcast for a conversation moderated by Trooper Sanders from Benefits Data Trust. All right, I'm gonna exit stage front. This is rude, but I'm just gonna do it anyway. I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you, Rakia. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you all for being here with us today. I hope that we will have a productive and interesting conversation together. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought I would start a new business, and masks have also double as pocket squares. You never took off until you looked at your mask mandate yesterday. Bad timing on my part. What a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Let me begin, as I always do, by saying to all of you, Amba Wastish, Dada Nastada, Tansi, Uji. Oki Nitsukwa, Nitsuwano Kabesto Tispistis, Size Etia. Now, what I just did was badly mispronounced a greeting in all of the indigenous languages of the land that I come from. The greeting means the same in all of those languages. It means greetings to all my relations. Because indeed, we are bound together by the land, by the air, and by the water, all part of that tapestry of humanity. So I love starting by saying greetings to all my relations. I come from a land as ancient as this one, where people have been gathering for many thousands of years. Calgary is located at the confluence of two rivers, the Bow and the Elbow. Yes, I know that's funny. In the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. It's a semi-arid region, even despite the fact that we got a weird spring snowstorm this week. It doesn't rain or snow very much. And so people have been drawn there by the water. The water in those rivers is what has brought people life. The original inhabitants of the land were called Nitsitapi. It just means the people. Today we call them the Blackfoot people. They're joined by the mountain people, the Ahe Nakoda people. And Calgary is bordered, literally across the street, by a reserve of the Beaver people, the Tsuut'ina people. The Blackfoot people have adopted me, and in typical Siksikatsitapi fashion, because they have a great sense of humor, they have given me a name that I cannot pronounce. I said it earlier. It's something like Abestotispistis. It means clan leader, he who moves camp and the others follow. The Tsuut'ina people have also adopted me. And to my Tsuut'ina brothers and sisters, I am known as Etia, always ready, which I hasten to remind everyone, including event organizers, does not mean always on time. Try to remind dates of that as well. It never works. You may have noticed that the Nakota have not given me a name. I've told that in their culture, they don't give names, they give horses. And my backyard is way too small. I say all of that because I want to remind us that we exist in a place where we've always built community. So for thousands of years, people have been coming to the confluence of my rivers, to that place that the Blackfoot call Mokinstis. Just like they've been coming here. And they've been coming here to hunt and fish and trade, to create, to dream, to dance, to live, to love, to fight sometimes. That last bit sounds like a city council meeting, eh, Councilwoman? Minus the live, love, dream, and dance parts. But ultimately, to engage in that very human act of building community. And that's why I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. Now, I'll start with a disclaimer. And this disclaimer, of course, says, I am but a visitor to this land. Despite going to school just north of here, this is my first time in the Commonwealth. I know, right? My best friend, who's from Allentown, has never let me forget about it. I did try to learn as much as I could about Philadelphia in the last day or two. I went on a hop-on, hop-off bus tour. I visited the Barnes Foundation, which is bonkers. I walked around a lot. And despite fasting for Ramadan, I did manage to squeeze in a hoagie and a cheesesteak when I broke my fast last night. That, plus digging very deep into the Pew Foundation State of the City report. I'm so sad that I'm going to be missing the new one, which is coming out next week, I understand. Makes me an expert on all things Philadelphia. Of course, it does not go Raptors. But Bill and the team, remember, we only have one basketball team in the whole country. So we got to be fans. But Bill and the team, nonetheless, were kind enough to invite me here today. And I thought I would start by giving you just a little bit of context of Calgary, a little bit of where it comes from. I was supposed to have a video, but I screwed up the technical parts, and they were all worried about it backstage, and I said, oh no, I can talk. So you're stuck with me instead. So Calgary's a bit smaller than Philadelphia. If you were to take a list of the highest population cities in Canada and the US, Philadelphia would be about 9th, Calgary would be about 11th or 12th. So a bit smaller, 1.4 million people. A lot of similar issues on a very different scale. 1 in 3 Calgarians is not white. The city tends to be a very prosperous place, fueled by energy. Our slogan is "Be part of our energy," which of course refers to the energy industry, but also refers to the entrepreneurship, the innovation, the electricity that you can feel in the air there. Something that I certainly felt here as I was wandering around trying to get my bearings yesterday. Despite being a prosperous place, despite being amongst the luckiest people on earth, we too face a number of issues. The opioid crisis has hit us hard, as I know it has hit here hard. COVID as well. Here's an interesting stat for you, which I just learned, which is that Calgary had far more confirmed cases of COVID than did Philadelphia, and 1/10 of the deaths, which is fascinating to me. I would love to dig a little more deeply into what that means and where all of that comes from, but certainly it's hit us all very hard. And so in reading the State of the City report and in reading some of the United Way documentation, I saw that a lot of questions were being asked. What comes next? Do we go back to the way things were? Do we go backwards? How do we move forwards? And of course, that's why all of you are spending a beautiful Springtime Friday with us here to address these incredibly difficult questions. So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this. I just finished being mayor exactly 6 months ago. And over the last couple of years, and certainly over the last 6 months, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what I call the 5 crises facing humanity today. You know, small issues. Any one of which would, I think, take down a lesser society. I just realized that I didn't start my timer, which is going to ruin your entire day. I'll start it now. That means I have a half hour from now, I think. I didn't know when I started thinking about this that there is in fact a sixth crisis. I did not know that, well, I did not put genocidal maniac invades another country taking us all to the brink of World War III on my bingo card. That one, of course, trumps all the others. Wait, am I allowed to use that word? This is the first time I've been in the US in 2 years.
No.
Okay. That one takes precedence over all the others. That, of course, as well as what I hope is a real reckoning in the entire world on the global refugee crisis, and how refugees are refugees whether they're the same color as us or the same religion as us or not. But I'm not going to talk, and by the way, I'll say this, which is, in Canada, there's a big debate right now because we're being so incredibly open to refugees from Ukraine. And a lot of folks are saying, how come we weren't that open to refugees from Syria? Why are we not that open today to refugees from Ethiopia or Yemen? You know, the most miserable places in the world right now. And I say to that, that's the wrong question. It's not to begrudge the people of Ukraine who deserve and need every ounce of help we can give them. It's to use this as a lesson for how we can help others, using the tremendous resources that we have together, that we're blessed to have together. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about any of that. I want to talk about the other five. The first, of course, is the public health crisis. The pandemic has laid bare many ways in which we were simply not prepared for a public health crisis of this magnitude. It has laid bare inequities in our society, a theme that you'll hear over and over in the next few minutes. And it has laid bare the fact that while we are all in the same storm, some of us are in super yachts, many of us are in sturdy, waterproof, hopefully only a little bit leaky boats. Some of us are in rowboats, and some of us are in the water. So coming to terms with how health is something that impacts every single one of us is an important piece of how we need to think about ourselves going forward. That's the first crisis. The second crisis is a mental health and addictions crisis. It's always been with us, but it has been exacerbated by the pandemic. 1 in 4 of us will be diagnosed formally with mental illness at some point in our lives. 1 in 4 of us. That's a Canadian stat. I'm pretty sure it applies in the US as well. 4 out of 4 of us will suffer with our mental health at some point in our lives. Maybe this morning before coffee. That means that in every single one of our closest families, there is someone who's been diagnosed with mental illness. And we never talk about it. We don't talk about it in our workplaces. We don't talk about it in our faith communities. We don't talk about it at school. Physical health and mental health are both health. When we combine that with the scourge of addiction, in Calgary, as I'm sure is the case here, far, far more people died of opioid overdose than died of COVID in the last 2 years. It's a silent pandemic. Not that silent if you're a family or friend, but ultimately something that we have to address in a way that we've not been able to yet. So, physical health, mental health, economic justice. The pandemic has underlined for all of us the fact that we have lost to the definition of decent work. That as a society, we have allowed large swaths of our community to work hard, to go to work every single day, and to live without hope that things could ever get better. To not be able to live a decent life. I have to tell you something. I'm going to sound a bit radical. This is by design. It is not accidental. When I graduated with my business degree 30 years ago, I was a child prodigy, what? The average CEO made about 50 to, maybe if you were a really great CEO, 100 times what your average worker made. In a very short period of time, that number has gone to 400 to 500 times. In Canada, the average CEO makes what his, and I say his, average worker makes by noon on January 1st. By design. Boards of directors have allowed themselves to use methodologies to set executive pay that are inflationary in nature. I am a business professor too, she didn't mention that. Because when you peer group to the 65th percentile of your peers, that means your salaries can only ratchet up. That's math. And we have done that at the expense of everyone else. And that means that we're seeing inequities in wealth in our communities that are higher than at any point since the Gilded Age. I don't mean the TV show. And we know what happened after the Gilded Age in the 1920s. This cannot hold. When people work hard every single day and they just cannot get ahead, and in fact move backwards, that is not a recipe for a stable society. And we must come to terms with the fact that much of what we see as poverty in our community is by design. At the beginning of the pandemic at home, we were introduced to, or reminded of, a group of people that we don't think very much about. They get up every morning very early. They take the bus to work. They arrive at work at a seniors' home, a long-term care center as we call them, where they wake up our grandparents and our parents, change their diapers, get them ready for breakfast. It's hard physical work. They do that until lunch, and then after the lunch break, they don't get a break, but after the lunch break for the residents, they have to leave because the operator of their facility does not want to pay benefits. So they only get 30 hours a week. And they get on another bus and go to their second job at another long-term care center and do the same for dinner. They get home late at night. If they're lucky, they get a few minutes to spend with their own kids before they go to bed and start it all over again the next day, relentlessly, day after day, with no hope for advancement, no hope for anything better for themselves, all of their hope residing only in the future of their children. Almost all of these people are women. Almost all of them are racialized women. And this is by design. In Canada, we have an immigration system where you can only come to the country if you meet certain criteria, if you're educated in a certain way, if you have a certain profession. I call it the greatest bait and switch in history, because as soon as you get here, you don't get to work in that profession, because we need you to work in those jobs that we don't want. By design. So do we have an opportunity now to be able to design and create something better? So, public health, mental health, economic justice. The fourth one, of course, environmental justice. Our carbon budget is running out. We don't have much more time to live this kind of lifestyle to which we've become accustomed. We need to be able to make significant change, and we need to do it quickly. Net zero by 2030 needs to be more than a slogan. It needs to be a way of life. And finally, the one that undergirds all of the others is the issue of equity. And you can hear me have said equity in every one of them. The murder of George Floyd reminded us that we have a lot of work to do, even in a place like Canada, even in a place where multiculturalism has been official government policy for as long as I've been alive. It celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. Even in my entire life, I have spent talking about pluralism and multiculturalism, how a cowboy place like Calgary could elect someone who looks like me without blinking an eye. And yet, in the summer of 2020, When I heard the stories of citizens of the racism they still feel, I wasn't surprised, I wasn't shocked, because those are the stories I went through too. But why are they still going on? I'm not young anymore. And when I hear 20-year-old men talk about the way they're treated in the store or on the street, and I say, well, those are the stories my friends told when we were 20, why hasn't it changed? And I had to put in my own mind, how do I simultaneously be very proud of what we've achieved and understand we've got a long way to go? So I don't know what this is. I don't know what anti-racism looks like. I don't know what true gender equity looks like. I don't know what a world looks like where trans people can walk through life able to fulfill their entire potential. But I know we have to get there. And I know kind of how we get there. I had a professor when I was an undergraduate, still teaches, and my niece is now an undergrad at the University of Calgary, and I told her she had to take his class because it changed my life, and hopefully it'll change hers. But I wasn't a very good student, so I'm probably misquoting him, so Ron Glassberg, sorry. But he used to talk about the cyclical nature of time, about how times of great tension can be followed by times of transcendence. So I believe that today we are in a wet clay moment, a moment where we get to craft our future. And when I hear people say, I can't wait to get back to normal, I can't wait for this to be over, whatever this is. I don't want to get back to normal. I want to use this moment to create a more just society. I want to use this moment to create a society that works for everyone. And this is the chance we have before us right now. But if we delay, if we wait, that clay hardens, and we don't have that opportunity anymore. So let me ask you, after the last 2 years, how many of you are exhausted? How many of you are tired of the fight, day in and day out, of trying to make a better place? Don't be shy. I'm exhausted. I'm not a politician anymore, that's how exhausted I am. But I gotta tell you, the fight is worth it. Now, I have the 1-minute signal, and I haven't even got to my topic, which is about creating civic coalitions. We'll talk a little about that in the gap here in the conversation. I do want to talk about how we created our anti-poverty plan and some thoughts we have for the promise, as well as my centerpiece of my last term as mayor, which was the creation of Canada's first community-based action plan on mental health and addiction. It's called A Community of Connections. You can check it out, communityofconnectionscalgary.ca. You can check out our anti-poverty plan, which is called Enough for All, which is based on a very, very simple premise. And that simple premise is, my neighbor's strength is my strength. My neighbor's success is my success, which means the corollary is also true. My neighbor's failure is my failure. It's all about connection. And so I said I don't know what the solution is, but I kind of know where to find it. If you've lived in Calgary or heard me speak before, you're familiar with one word in Sanskrit, and that word is seva, S-E-V-A. It means service. It means selfless service. And it is in our seva, in our service, that we find the solutions. So let me wrap up by saying to every one of you, thank you for your seva. Thank you for what you do every single day to make this and all communities better. I'm deeply grateful that, as bad as it is, we live in this moment with these people. That we get to be here, that we get to have the incredible privilege of building that better future, which is something that every one of you does every single day. Thank you all. Oh, there, perfect, thank you.
Oh, wow, let's see. Am I on? Can you hear me? How about now? Yes? Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor. Hello, everybody. I am Trooper Sanders. I am CEO of Benefits Data Trust, a nonprofit founded right here in Philadelphia in 2005. And we help Philadelphians and people all across the country tap benefits such as SNAP and Medicaid and others that really makes a difference. And this is a pretty highfalutin room of people. I would defy anyone here, no matter how many degrees you have, the billions of dollars of deals you've done, I would challenge you to try to fill out a SNAP application and see how quickly it brings you to tears and humility. And I'm really, really proud that the United Way has been a great friend and partner to BDT these number of years. I should also say I'm a new boy to Philadelphia. I moved here in 2019, in September 2019, to begin working for Benefits Data Trust. Actually, this is an interesting bookend. Bill kindly hosted an event to welcome me to Philadelphia where I met some wonderful people. And then the pandemic happened, and I've been sitting in my apartment for 2.5 years. And sort of, I have my little COVID walking lanes that I would do and a couple coffee shops to get out. But I still feel very, very new, like I'm just unpacking the boxes. So it's amazing to, this is the largest number of Philadelphians I've been in a room with. So it's wonderful to be here. Mayor, thank you so much. I would also like to introduce our two co-panelists. First, Councilwoman Maria Quiñones-Sánchez. And of course, the indomitable, incredible Dalila Wilson-Scott. So, as everyone knows, Councilwoman, she has served Philadelphia for decades, but most recently, relatively speaking, representing the 7th District, including parts of North Philadelphia since 2008. Chairs the Appropriations and Education Committee. Approps is extremely important. That's where the real deal meets. And is co-chair of the Special Committee on Poverty Reduction and has been a friend to BDT as well. So thank you so much. And Dalila is Executive Vice President at Comcast and Chief Diversity Officer and President of the Comcast NBC Universal Foundation. So you're busy. And has a wonderful team who've been wonderful to me and my colleagues at BDT as well. So let's get started. Mayor, I had the pleasure of spending some time in Calgary in early 2019, and one of the things that's extraordinary about Calgary is, we talk about artificial intelligence and innovation and all sorts of fancy things. And we know about Silicon Valley and other regions, but Calgary is also one of the founding areas for AI and a lot of the innovations that we are talking about. And so I had a wonderful time. Also, I think it's important to know that, being in Philadelphia, the seat of the American Revolution, there's a saying that America was evolved through revolution, Canada evolved through evolution. We won't talk about Ottawa and all of that. We'll just leave that alone. But one of the things, Philadelphia was one of the pathways on the Underground Railroad, and as we were the extended founding of America to deal with the original sin of slavery. But what is also interesting is that Canada was the final destination for the Underground Railroad, and there's an extraordinary community of descendants of those who traveled on the Underground Railroad in Calgary. So, Mayor, at the end of your remarks, you mentioned some interesting work that Calgary was doing on poverty reduction and partnerships. Why don't you just take a minute to talk about that?
Happy to do that. Thanks for the cue, and I'm a little upset you didn't come by City Hall and say hello when you were there. By the way, the other funny thing about Canada is that once I finished being mayor, I lost the title. So in the U.S., I know you keep it for life, but we're all just commoners now. So when you hear me, when I keep wanting to correct you, but I'm in your country, so I'll be respectful of your. Bill said an interesting thing when he was speaking. which is he said that Rakia said to him, "How can I help?" which was an un-Philly thing to say. And that really struck me, because I often say one of my key lines is that the most Canadian of all questions, the most Calgarian of all questions, is in fact that question: how can I help? And that's really where the poverty work and the mental health work came from. It became clear that we had a situation where there were jurisdictional battles. I'm sure this doesn't sound familiar at all, Councilwoman, where the city had very little power or authority, but everyone else was passing the buck. The nonprofit sector, the provincial government, state government to you, and the federal government. Just back and forth, back and forth. It's politicians' favorite game in Canada. Keep passing the ball so you don't have to do anything. But what the city had was convening authority. So we were able to bring people together, because if the mayor invites you, you usually come. And so we crafted this roundtable, and the criteria for being on the roundtable were very simple. You had to be smart and you had to care. That's it. And so there were corporate leaders like Dalila here, there were CEOs, there were nonprofit sector leaders, the head of the United Way was there, there were people working in the trenches, there were people with lived experience of poverty, and there was me. And together, we had to start by saying it's important to abandon our assumptions. It's important not to have turf. So even though every single person in the room who's worked in poverty can tell me great stories about the work they've done in helping individuals and families. I mean, the work you're doing, it sounds so technical, but so incredibly important. In Canada, the similar thing is we got to get people filling out their tax returns. Otherwise, they're not eligible for a whole raft of benefits. So that's my new volunteer thing I'm going to start next year, just filling out tax returns for people. But ultimately, even though everyone can tell us heroic stories of change they've made, the rates of poverty have not shifted in generations. Child poverty in particular has not moved. It means we're doing something wrong. So we have to be willing to give up what we're doing, even though we love it, to try and do something better. And by the way, partly, only very partly as a result of that strategy, but largely as a result of policy changes at the federal and provincial level that maybe were driven by that strategy, we have cut the rate of child poverty in half. So these things do matter. And it's an opportunity for us to really make change by bringing everyone into the room.
Wonderful. Well, Councilwoman, as a fellow leader of local government that is real, I used to do a little bit of dabbling in the federal government, and that's an intellectual exercise compared to local government. What strikes you as interesting and similar to our Philadelphia experience?
Well, I think all of the attributes you're talking about, who needed to be in the room, what are the discussions that need to be happening? We were having all of these discussions pre-pandemic, right? There was this recognition that those of us who love Philadelphia hated being the largest poor city, right? And we could agree about what we needed. We didn't have to agree on how we got there, but it was sort of like, I am tired. Whether you sat with the philanthropic community, the nonprofit community, the business community, we're tired of it. So pre-pandemic, we were having these discussions as a result of us convening the Poverty Committee with a lot of stakeholders to try to have that conversation. And, I don't want to get into the sportsmanship situation here, but we are known for not being good sportsmen sometimes, right? Although we will be gracious when we beat you, but...
I'm familiar with your hockey team.
But there's this Philly shrug that some of us are just exhausted with. And so the anti-poverty work and then the work United Way was doing, there were all these discussions about poverty. The chamber was having a conversation, everyone was having a conversation, and everyone that I would say to, how do we bring all of this together, would chuckle at me and shrug me. And I said, no, we have to bring this together. And to the credit of Bill, the United Way leadership, the corporate community, those conversations started. Then COVID hit and we pivoted. And like Bill said, United Way stood up to the challenge and partnered with the city and got money to nonprofits and helped us with Philly Connect with Comcast and others. And then we paused for a minute, and then it took me a while to get folks to say, no, now we got to double down. right? Now, this is not the time to walk away from the conversation. This is the time to double down. And it has been difficult because there are lanes. There are legacy organizations who've done fabulous work who don't want to be challenged about what is the return on investment on what we're doing. And that, for me, is why the promise is so important and why we have to make it work, which requires an enormous amount of conversations, of listening, right? Looking at the structural problems that exist. BBT was formed because there was, that SNAP application is obnoxious, right? LIHEAP and how we make people fill out the same application so the whole system is hostile towards poor people. You gotta go to 7 different places just to manage. And so we have to double down on saying those are all created. Someone sits in a room who's never filled out an application and develops a policy based on the 1% of the people that might take advantage of it, not for the 99% of the people that you spoke about that works 2 jobs. And so I am encouraged. I am going to continue to be a cheerleader in believing that government cannot solve it all, as we learned during COVID, but that we need to be a better partner and not ask the private sector to do what we don't do, right? Introspective. And then partner and work better with our stakeholders, because I also don't think that government appreciates the work of the folks on the ground doing the work.
Thank you for that. So I should have said at the beginning, for those with questions, please go on the online platform and put your questions in, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So one of the key parts of having coalitions, of having cross-sector partnerships, is business and the private sector. And there are lots of theory around how to engage business and the role of business. It's very different and a lot of hard work in practice. And Dalila is right in the middle of that, both in Philadelphia but also across the country. What are your thoughts on the role of business and what's effective in business's role in these coalitions and some of the lessons that we should take?
Well, I think one thing that's important to note is people are asking so much more of the private sector today than ever before. Our employee voice and what they want to see, what they want us to stand for, what we value, over and above how we actually make profits, is critical to many stakeholders, and people are watching us in a very different way. But I think, private sector has always had unique tools and resources to leverage, but collaboration, at the end of the day, effective collaboration, is all about trust. So on a macro level, if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, there's several of these types of surveys. Business right now is the highest as it's ever been, and is the most trusted sector. The NGO trust factor has also moved up, and at the lower end of that trust barometer is media and the government. So, but that's a macro level. If I'm in Kensington, if I'm in the 7th District, and I'm trying to get people to sign up for, low-cost broadband, I can't do that without the councilwoman here. And I think we all have to recognize, the shared purpose is actually the easy part. As the councilwoman said, there's not a person in Philadelphia who doesn't want our poverty numbers to go down, doesn't want to see the type of gun violence we're seeing today. The drama happens in how are we going to get there, and what are each of us willing to do differently. And part of that means we need to recognize that there are strengths across the table. You can't collaborate with someone you don't value. And you also have to recognize what you don't bring to the table, which is trust in certain communities or resources in certain communities. So I think that, everybody you can co-invest with someone, you can attend the same meetings, you can even convene to your heart's content. But if you're not willing to do something differently and to recognize the value around the table, you're not going to move forward in collaboration. So I think private sector can do some of those things differently. They can bring innovation. Government is always going to be the biggest funder in the room. I don't care where you are. But I think what's important is, foundations and private sector often have a different type of flexibility, right? Philanthropic capital, business capital is often some of the best risk capital out there. And if we can fund that innovation that allows for public resources to be leveraged further, better, that's a huge win. So, one of many roles the private sector plays, but I think all of us have to be thoughtful about what we want to see in collaboration.
So let's talk more about that with the whole panel. I sort of think about creating coalitions and partnerships is like a slow cook meal. And actually having the partnerships it's not really family, it's not a marriage, it's a bit like a long-term lease on a group house. You can get out of it, there's gonna be a penalty, so we're all kind of stuck together and just please don't drink my orange juice, that's annoying. But I'm wondering, from where you sit, how do we actually make the promise of partnerships work? What are some of the tough issues we need to confront and the hard lessons that you might have seen in your areas of work?
Well, I should give you a bit more of my bona fides. When I was speaking, I may have sounded a little radical in some ways. I also worked at McKinsey for a long time, and I'm a business professor. So for the past 12 years, I've worn purple every single day. And it's not because it brings out the color of my eyes. It's because it's a political statement. As every grade schooler knows, purple is not a primary color, it's a secondary color. It's a combination of red and blue. And so the statement that I've been trying to make is we are not defined by where we stand. We are defined by our common humanity. And we need to be able to work together to find that common ground. In the business school, my field is nonprofit management. And so I spend a lot of my time at the intersection of nonprofit, business, and public sector. And to me, the commonality between those is a sense of mission. So while Dalila needs to maximize profit for her stakeholders, and I'm very happy the Corporate Roundtable says it's not just about shareholder profit anymore, and while the councilwoman's job is to ensure the best quality of life for every Philadelphian, and the nonprofit sector's job is narrowly defined by that nonprofit sector's vision, in reality, there is a very big common ground. Dalila only does well when people can afford her services. The councilwoman only gets reelected if people are happy. And the folks in the nonprofit sector only achieve their mission by achieving their mission. So ultimately, people's quality of life and well-being and prosperity is very central to what we do. So as much as I want to appeal to Dalila in her foundation role, give me money, I also need to appeal to her in her business role. And so, for example, when I speak with corporate audiences, I often say, I want you to do two things when you get back to the office. The first is to call up your HR and recruiting department and ask them whether they have modified and modernized their hiring criteria to ensure they're recognizing newcomers with foreign credentials, that they're recognizing non-traditional experience as they hire. Most HR departments, by the way, have not. And the second thing I want you to do is to go to your procurement department, your supply chain department, and ask them, how do our procurement policies help entrepreneurs, wealth-creating entrepreneurs in our community? So do we have rules about the insurance you need and the experience and the references you have that shut out startups? Have we figured out a way to be the first clients of an immigrant or minority-owned business instead of their last clients? And these are ways in which you can save money, get better product, and hire better people. And so that's just one example of finding that commonality in building those coalitions, I believe.
I think in government, and I want to give a lot of credit to Mayor Jim Kenney and obviously President Darrell Clark, who put together the committee and worked on this. There's a real recognition that we have some structural challenges in government, the way government is set up, efficiencies that we need to obtain so that we can better invest. I think the problem becomes when there isn't a united front about an agreement on that mission, right? We need to be mission focused. The legislature, the judicial, we see it in criminal justice reform. You can't be on an island, and we need to figure out a space. And I think the promise has given us an opportunity to try to break down some of those barriers. Some of the challenges, particularly in government, and again, I'm a fan of public service work and folks who get into government, is that there are systems, that have been hostile to poor people. There's the racial component, the gender component, and I think we're and COVID really highlighted, I think we're at a place where we can talk about it without feeling like we're being offensive, right? And that's a good start, but that's only the beginning, right? Owning it is one thing. I think people are talking about it. What I haven't seen in government is the adoption of owning it and saying, and I'll use department, I try to use departments that are, people don't think of as improving people's quality of life, but it matters, and it's really core and basic to people's reelection. You take departments like the streets department or the water department that could substantially improve the quality of life in neighborhoods, right? But if you don't properly fund and value those departments, the lowest paid departments, the streets department, 96% of the staff is African American. They start at a salary of $38,000 who might be eligible for BDT services. And you compare us to other large cities, New York, where the starting salary is $90,000, they work at night. So again, it goes back to what we value and what we invest. And in government, it is just glaring, the departments that we care about and fund and the ones that we don't. And then it really relates back to that environmental justice, the economic justice. And so, again, we're talking about it as a government. We now have to own it, right? And then we have to use, and I say this all the time, and if you heard me as chair of appropriations, our budget is our moral document. It really does speak to what we believe and what we value. And so there's a lot of work to be done in that space. And again, I always say this often, we cannot ask the private sector to do what we don't do. We have to do that as government. And part of that is owning it and then now acting on it. And I'm not saying that this is going to change overnight, but what I am saying is you've got to give people that predictability. Housing stability creates predictability for families. There are things that people need, and predictability is one of them. And knowing that they have a government who owns their challenges and is investing in it, then people are willing to say, okay, that pothole will eventually get filled. It's basic, but it really is not. And if you look at our budget, it still reflects the need to prioritize historically marginalized neighborhoods and communities, right, and how we service them. And one of the challenges in the leadership piece, and this is what I appreciate about the mayor the most, is we gotta stop pinning one group of people against the other. And I say this as someone who represents Kensington. And every time there's a debate about services, what Kensington gets everything, and no, folks, when we talk about investing in people, it's not taking it away from a group of people. It's understanding that you have to do more to bring everyone up. So we still lack the ability to talk about all, and we're still very geographical in our conversations. And as elected officials, I try to check myself, but that is, I think, the biggest challenge is how am I a good cheerleader for what I want to promote without creating this division about which zip code you live in, which does determine your future.
Well, that sentiment seems to be particularly important to make the promise a reality and the promise compact that people can rely on. What are your thoughts on, what's the dream ahead in terms of the types of cross-sector partnerships and coalitions, in a practical way? Where should we be, say, in the next year? What's the tough elephant in the room that we might need to address to be able to get there?
I think when you're part of any collaboration, but certainly a collaborative as complex as this, is something we all want, is something we probably don't perfectly agree how to get to the next step. So when we look ahead, we have to think about progress, and that we wouldn't be able to get there on our own. So if I just take PHL Connected as an example, today I can say, yes, 91% of the K-12 households in Philadelphia have high-speed internet. Pre-COVID, it was only 70%. But let me walk you through what it's like to live through that process, right? To start, even with the school district data, our data, data from Comcast, the city data, we could not estimate the exact number of people who didn't have internet. So how do we size this thing, right? So that was the first question. So there had to be, some analysis done there and, using a range. Second, we had, again, back to the trust factor, we had people who trusted the school district, people who trusted the city, people who had trusted Comcast, but not necessarily all shared audiences. So how were we going to influence our constituency that this is the right thing to do? This was not, an inexpensive program. This is well before the government had laid out the enormous amount of money, $60 billion, to support broadband that's out there now. And fortunately, because of the collaboration in this city, Philly was one of the first cities to announce that. Chicago followed our example, and many other cities around the country. So did we know we were going to get to 90%? No, but we knew it was going to work better, faster with all of us at the table. So how do we bring funders along? How do we bring our community partners along? What we knew at Comcast, because we had been focused on this for 10 years, affordability is only one part of the equation. There are many other barriers that prevent people from signing up for any services. One, the clarity, the complexity point. We just talked about the SNAP applications. It's, not any different for this space as well. Two is just the structural limitations. So if I'm living in poverty, I'm more likely to be in an unstable housing situation, which means I'm not signing up for a benefit that requires me to have a permanent address of some sort. But we had to work through all of those things. We also had to get to the point where we were not seeking perfection. Perfection is absolutely the enemy of progress in a collaboration. And sometimes, everybody has their objectives they bring to the table, and everybody has a different set of priorities. But if you're not willing to give on some of that to reach the greater good, you're not going to get there. So that's a data point for us here to say, okay, everything wasn't perfect. We didn't have all the data we needed, but we made it happen, and we now have the highest rate of broadband adoption in the public school district that we have ever had. And we have a clear path to making sure the resources that the government provides are going to be allocated to the neighborhoods that really need it. We haven't had that before. So you kind of have to go in with a little bit of blind trust, as well as trusting your partners. And I think that's what the promise is about. Again, all of us want to see our city in a better state. Poverty is not their problem. Poverty is our problem, right? Our businesses suffer, our economy suffers, everybody in the city suffers when we're not moving the poverty rate. And everybody conceptually understands that, but you got to break down that, what do those action steps look like? And really checking yourself to make sure you're doing something different than you would have otherwise done. And I think that's the trick, right? If every one of us was doing what we've always done, then it would have already been solved. So clearly we need to try something different. I think that's why many of us are invested in the promise. On top of the fact that while it's not solely driven on data, it's data informed, and data is a critical piece of it, but it's listening sessions. It's talking to communities about what they need and want, not any one of us imposing our solutions on the table. You can't do that without community, and I think the collaboration brings that as well.
So I would just remind everyone, if you have questions, please submit them. So I was struck by your comment around the post-COVID and it not being a return to normal, but it's the new next. It's where do we go? And in our work at Benefits Data Trust, one of the things that always stuck in my mind is, of course, there was enormous need during the pandemic. And we have data that shows if we can get senior citizens SNAP, so the ability to get a better bag of groceries, we can save the healthcare system $2,300 a person a year. And we can also it helps delay when a senior might otherwise go into a nursing home. And that's important for two reasons. One, as we know, one of the epicenters of mortality from COVID were nursing homes. And it's just extraordinary to think that if we had made sure every senior eligible for SNAP had it, a material number of seniors would have spent the pandemic arguing with their family about why they couldn't go to their Monday morning, coffee hour, and all the things that it was fussing with their family as opposed to what actually happened. And so I think there's a lesson around let's build the system, taking all the hard lessons that we learned and just get on with it. The other part is, I think about Comcast and the types of workers that Comcast needs to stay in business and the types of jobs that the councilwoman wants in her district. A lot of those are science, tech, engineering, math jobs. Now, we know for a lot of hardworking families, if you're working 2 or 3 jobs, you may have kids who can get on that path, but guess who's going to be the person in that home to keep the kid on track? It's grandma and grandpa. So again, if we can keep grandma and grandpa out of the nursing home in a better shape, it not only is just right for them, but it's actually can fuel the city's economic growth. So I'm curious, as we think about, hopefully we're seeing the end of the pandemic, as we think about the new, better normal, post-COVID, how do we raise our sights? How are we aggressive? How do we, Councilwoman, I've always admired local officials because you don't get a comment letter when people have feedback for you. You get a few choice words. And I'm born in Detroit, but Philadelphia has a particular way of expressing itself. I'm like, oh my, I really am Midwestern. This is a lot. But yeah, how do we step it up?
My husband does not answer the door. I live in my district and in the neighborhood of Norris Square, and when they knock on the door, he says, "My friends call, so that's for you." So yeah, I get really choice words. I think that, and in fact, I had wrote in March we closed up, and in April I wrote an editorial where I said I don't want normal. Normal was never good for the 7th Councilmatic District. So yeah, all of us attributed to that. In fact, City Council, as chair of the Appropriations Committee, one of the first things that I had done, I had started to kind of stash money for the promise, but also stashing money for investing in innovation as part of our anti-poverty discussion. And, Charmaine Matlock-Turner, who was the co-chair, and Eva Gladstein and ML Walls, we all knew what could be scaled up very quickly. So there was a couple tens of millions of dollars that I had stashed. And quickly after the pandemic, under the leadership of Council President Clark, we created the new normal budget in City Council. And so while we were pivoting into all the crisis responses, because crisis does create those opportunities, right? If we had planned, and I say this as chair of education, if we had said we were going to get a Chromebook in every child's hands and get them service, it would have taken us a 10-year plan. COVID made us pivot to a situation where in 18 months, all of this happened. And so there was a lot of great work that was done there. So council created this new normal budget, and we started working on same-day pay and investing in stuff that we scaled up. And so we now have a new commitment, a renewed commitment. You saw that last year in our response to the gun violence situation, where we said we're going to invest $155 million differently and scale up. I will remind folks that during the 2009 downturn, we divested from a lot of the small grassroots organizations, particularly in the African American community. So it's going to take us a few years to build that back up, right? And I say that because I am data informed, want to produce evidence-based programming, but there's an infrastructure that we decimated that we have to reinvest in. So it's going to take us a few years, and I say this as a former executive director of a nonprofit. Council came through, and the mayor's proposing significant amount of money for new investments around some of this gun violence. Young people were disengaged, and during COVID, the trauma that they experienced, right? When we were trying to open schools and the conversations about opening schools, I had to remind people schools were never closed. Laurie Jones is here from Full Abundance knows we fed, the majority of the workers in the schools, though, SEIU and Unite workers, predominantly African American essential workers, right? Now we gratify them because they're essential workers. They kept their schools open to feed families every single day. And so when we were opening schools, it was a very difficult conversation to have because everybody wanted a safe return. But I kept saying to folks, I need kids in school buildings because that's where they eat, and sometimes that's where their safety zone is. And the conversations with the adults sometimes really clouded the conversation. So crisis creates opportunities for us to look at things differently. What I will say is still missing, right? I think we're still missing this common vision for how this investment from government, who will always have to play a key role through policy and investment. You know, we were very lucky to receive about $1.7 billion from the government. And to a certain degree, this year's budget doesn't reflect us willing to invest that money. In fact, you know, the proposal is to stash it a little bit, similar to what the state is doing, stashing $7 billion when we're in a crisis recovery. It's shameful. You're going to see over the next couple of weeks some real deep conversation about how do we invest that money for a recovery that's more equitable so that we demonstrate that we've owned our problem and that we're willing to invest in the human capital. The infrastructure conversation is hugely important. I'm a great believer that infrastructure helps us improve quality of life. Tree canopies, you know, for those of us, I represent Hunting Park, highest heat index, right? When you're trying to explain why kids have asthma and all those other situations. But I still don't think that we have a common vision for, and the conversation is not about what happens next year. It is what the city looks like in 2030. So that investment, like stashing money, right? And I'm prudent with the money as the chair. We should not be stashing money. We should be investing in the human capital of the city so that the recovery, and we own the inequities and the historical discrimination that existed in our systems. And that will send a message that we are not going back to that old normal that was not good for the majority of the citizens of Philadelphia.
You know, I think crises do spark action. And as Councilwoman said, it does cause all of us to reflect. I think that when people talk about equity now, there's a little bit more understanding of what that means, right? Equality versus equity. And even with these unprecedented amount of resources on the table, how those dollars are allocated is key. Because if we make the mistakes we have in the past, we're going to end up with an exacerbated issue. And I think the administration is trying to do that with equity action plans and holding the different governments accountable. But at the end of the day, those dollars will go to the state level, and every single state will make a different decision. And you want to make sure that the communities that are not currently at the table are being included in that discussion. For the first time, however, there are clawbacks. Now it'll be interesting to see if that actually takes place, right? The government takes money back from a state and issues it locally if the recovery isn't equitable. And I think that's something that we're all looking forward to. I think also, you know, all of us constantly hear about movement versus moment and what is this going to be, but I think what all of us need to recognize is we make that decision. That's not something that's happening to us. That's something that we bring into reality. And making sure that to the point of not stashing for the rainy day, it's raining. So we need to figure out what that means and make some choices, again, without all the perfect information, because we will never have that. And also to take some risks and explore new innovative ways of getting this work done. And it's happening at such a pace where we won't have enough time to get it, again, perfectly right, but we don't want to lose this opportunity. I mean, again, as I mentioned, it's $60 billion just available for broadband. The Transportation Department also has huge infrastructure dollars on the table, more than we've ever seen before. But there are some states who've never thought about an equitable allocation of resources. That's a different question. And I just think that it's a moment that we can all take advantage of, but we do have to think of it as a moment that may not come again in our generation. And it would be a shame for us to not leverage it for the communities that need it most.
So we've touched on, I have an interesting question on the Canadian experience. So we've touched on the deep inequities and historic challenges that surround poverty. And you spoke about the North American racial reckoning. There's also an extraordinary conversation and reckoning in Canada right now around Indigenous matters and First Nations, Inuit, Métis. How does that hard, long, deep wound and conversation fit into something as I don't know, comparatively twee when you're talking about cross-sector partnerships, but you're talking about historic long issues such as the Indigenous challenge?
I see a sign that says we've got 5 minutes left, and you've just asked the hardest of all questions. And I'm going to do that politician thing by answering your last question before I answer that one. I just have two quick things to say. First of all, I just want to say I am blown away by this panel. Thank you, all three of you, for your tremendous insight. I want to say two things. Number one is I'm not very smart, and so I only have one solution to every problem. Actually, two. And my two solutions to every problem, I think, are relevant in this time of crisis. The first is to take a systems-wide view. To get out of, my old prof, Dr. Ron Heifetz used to say, get off the dance floor and get on the balcony and watch the dancers. And I think it's important for us to take that view. So that's my first solution. My second solution is put the citizen at the center. Don't put the bureaucracy at the center, don't put the process at the center, put the citizen at the center. Which, if I can pick on you for a minute, I love that you're helping people fill out the damn forms. Let's get rid of the damn form. And really, that's oversimplistic, but we need to think about what it is we're trying to achieve and take a systemic view. And the good thing, if there's any good thing about the pandemic, is that it has upended all of our assumptions about how society works. Teachers had to learn to be online teachers over a weekend in my town. And so because of that, we really have a moment of creation. And we must take advantage of it by looking at the whole system right now, because everything's up in the air. And I think this is an incredible opportunity. The problem, however, is that we also live in the most divisive of all times. And sometimes it feels like division and partisanship and mean-spiritedness and anger are winning. And we have to be able to overcome it. It doesn't mean making space for crazies. I'll be that blunt. But it means understanding most people are not crazy. And, the world is not about building testosterone levels in men by tanning their nether parts, if you get the reference.
Unfortunately, I do. My Twitter feed is...
So weird. But that's what we've come to, right? A guy like me will say something about income inequity, and I'll be painted as a radical socialist for even talking about that. Never mind that I'm a business professor. So we have to be able to overcome that. And because I was a mayor and you're a councillor, in municipal government, you can only be optimistic. You have to be. And there is a case for optimism. There's a meme that was going around Canada that said what they want you to believe, and it showed society cleaved down the middle in relation to COVID. And then it said what society really is, and it showed a little piece at the end feels one way and 90% of people are vaccinated. And so that's, I think, what we have to be able to move towards, getting post-partisan. That's why I love municipal government, no parties in Canada. But we have the ability to be able to do something much more. So finally, and very quickly, the biggest sin of Canada, so in Britain, the biggest sin is their inability to deal with class. In America, the biggest sin is inequities related to race. And in Canada, the biggest sin has been the historical, terrible treatment of Indigenous people. So what I did at the very beginning, it's called a land acknowledgement. You can't go to a wedding in Canada now without someone doing a land acknowledgement at the beginning. That's in the last 2 years. It's completely changed. It was never done before unless you were super politically correct. And I think that Canadians have recognized through a lot of trauma the need for reconciliation. So very quickly, last summer, there were 200 bodies found in an unmarked grave at the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia, not far from Calgary. And the country went into a paroxysm mourning and grief. And my first reaction was I was actually irritated by it. Because I was like, is that what it took? Have you not been paying attention all these years? Have you not been listening to the elders? Because by the way, there's not 200 missing children, there's 5,000. And we've known that for years. The first report on residential schools was 95 years ago. It took 80 years to close them. We've always known, what are you waking up to now? And a trusted elder told me, you know what, quit it. Because people's hearts are broken right now. And a broken heart is also an open heart. So fill it. So fill it. And to me, that is also a lesson that we can learn about everything. The murder of George Floyd broke a lot of hearts. And it's just one example of so many. So let's fill those hearts. Let's take our anger and our frustration and our grief and our mourning and fill. And fill and fill and fill and build and build and build. And I hope that's the path we're on with Indigenous peoples in Canada.
Thank you very much. What a perfect way to end. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.